Okay, in this video I'm going to have a look at the torque limiter, so I'm just going to go and find the torque limiter. There it is, as pulled straight off of my edc16 layout file. So there's the torque limiter as it stands currently. Now, if I look at it at the moment, it may not make a great deal of sense because, unlike EDC15s, the output is in torque, and if you're used to dealing with fueling, obviously these figures don't make a great deal of sense when you first look at them. If we pick a number, it doesn't really matter, but one that's a high number obviously would help. So if we pick a number and say, what about 280, because that seems to be somewhere up around the high point, doesn't it? 282. If I then go to my torque to IQ conversion chart, this one, which again was pulled straight off the same file, I turned it into a graph. So if I want to get a vague idea of what 280 is talking about, that would be there. And 280 there is somewhere in the region of 50 milligrams. So I'm limiting to 50 milligrams. If I try and... yeah, I mean, it's very close to 50 milligrams according to that. So I could say to myself, right, at the moment in this region I'm very close to 50 milligrams, so I might be looking at something like 49, 50, 49 and so on. So this is the sort of peak area. Now again, I'm using a calculator, and again 1 represents that number times 1 and appears here as a result, and so any number that's above 1 becomes a percentage change on here, and again an increased change is reflected in red and a decreased change is in blue, and no change remains black. And what I've done is I've gone for a 10% increase there, 11%, 11%, 12%, 13%, 14%, 14%, 15%, 16, 16, 17, 18, 19, 18, none. So basically what I've done is I've shifted the high point. If we were looking at this as a graph, there would be, let's say, a little hump there and then back down again. So what I've done is I've shifted it across so that the hump is now, well, it's still roughly here, but it's a hump that now goes up like that and then stays much higher for much longer before coming back down again. So my graph would look more like that, up, across and down. Still got a slight taper off at this end, and it's a good idea to have what I think of as an emergency cut-off. In other words, it's always a good idea to have one number at the end with 0. Then you cannot completely destroy the engine, or hopefully not, using the accelerator pedal, because there will be a cut point at the very end. So hopefully you will not rev to the point where you damage your own engine. Right, now once I've done that, then I've got new figures thanks to these percentages, and so again I can look to see what my maximum is. Now my new maximum is somewhere in the region of 310. So you'd have thought, of course, that the biggest number here would give me my biggest new maximum, but it doesn't, because these numbers were actually going down. So by making a bigger percentage increase, I still end up with a relatively small number. So a small increase on a bigger number gives me my biggest numbers. So my highest torque value, so my highest injected quantity, is still roughly in this area, and I've got what, 312, 310, 311, so I might as well call it 310. Now if I go and look at my graph and I say to myself, okay, where's 310? That would be there, so 310 is roughly there. Difficult to go across at exactly the same point, but it's somewhere in the region and probably about 55 or 56. So I'm probably looking at about 55 or 56. Now I could have converted this properly and made it look nice, but I haven't bothered, because what I've done is I've given myself a little clue here to remind myself. So as I've said here, 310 Newton meters is approximately 56 milligrams. So we had the driver's wish, and again I've made a note here to remind myself, the driver's wish was allowing for approximately 350 newton meters, which would have been about 70 milligrams. And that was from our tuned driver's wish map. Then I tuned the smoke map, and that gave a maximum of 66 milligrams. So I've gone from 70 to 66, and now the torque map is limiting me to about 55, 56. So if I want more, and I stress if, but if I want more, I've got room, haven't I? Because if I decide to increase this, if I play with these numbers a little bit more and increase them a little bit more, I'm not going to hit the smoke limiter yet. So I could play with these numbers and up this 56 a little bit more to take it a little bit closer to 66 if I want to. But I would never do that. When I was making a basic tune, I would go for something like 70. In fact, if I was doing this for real, I wouldn't even bother with 70. I would have probably considered keeping that somewhere around about the 66 mark anyway, because I can't see me needing that at the moment for this tune. But 70, let's say we leave it at 70. 70 is fine, 66 is fine, 56 is fine. So all these numbers are fine. So I would use these numbers and try them out in the car and see how the car drove and to see how happy I was with the performance. And very often you can give yourself a nicer performance by altering the distribution of these points. In other words, changing the shape of the graph. So these numbers very often will give you a nicer car to drive when you shift them around a little bit by moving them right and left, so that the graph changes, let's say, from here and goes up and is relatively flat and then comes down again. Or you can make it a little bit more abrupt, so it comes along a little bit more before the numbers jump up, or you could make it a more gentle slope as a rise. So in other words, there is often more to be gained in terms of drivability by moving these numbers around than there is by just making them bigger. But many people fall into the trap of just deciding that all they need is big numbers with lots of fuel, and that's good enough. And I mean, it is if you don't care how the car drives. So at the end of the day, it's up to you whether you want to fine-tune things like the torque map and the smoke map to give you a nicely performing car rather than an aggressively performing car. Right, that's the torque limiter covered, so I will stop there.